16 and 18-year-olds across the country received their A-level results for the very first time since the COVID-19 pandemic. Long time. How did they fare in comparison to previous years, and are many of our young people going to university? Joining me to discuss this is Mouhssin Ismail. Hello, Mouhssin. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
You're the principal of Newham Collegiate Sixth Form, NCS in short. It's been a pioneering institute in terms of the news nationally. In terms of East London, it's been something of an absolute curveball in terms of where this area, this part of London was in the educational sense. I want to find out from you as an education, someone who's passionate about education, what is it that makes your institutes stand out and be so successful?
Good question. So the NCS was set up with the sole objective of educating able students from East London and supporting their transition to some of the most competitive universities in the country. I think the secret sauce, if you want to call it that, of a school like the NCS, you'll be surprised to hear that it's nothing fancy. It's strong discipline, high levels of ambition, lots of hard work and effort, and ensuring that the young people have the support that they need to be able to go to those universities. I think what's happened in East London for a long time, and we've spoken about this at length on previous occasions, is that the bar of expectation has been set pretty low. And what we've tried to do is to go in there and say, well, Oxford and Cambridge should be the norm. You should be trying to apply to those universities. That doesn't mean that everyone has to go to Oxford and Cambridge, but if they're recognised as the two elite universities in the country, there's no reason why we shouldn't be saying to our young people, that's where you should be aspiring to. But we went one step further and said, why not the Ivy Leagues? And I think we're now seeing, well, since we started in 2014, the first students from the second most disadvantaged borough in London getting full scholarships to go to Harvard, Princeton, MIT, and this year another student to Dartmouth. So I think once you start showing young people that it is possible, you end up having a ripple effect within a borough, and other students lower down the years also start thinking, why not me?
Sure.
And that mindset, and you challenge that soft bigotry of low expectation that's been existing for such a long period of time.
Well, I mean, I think what comes across from me, I've always been impressed with how you've come across and how you are projected of a Muslim educationalist, a British Muslim educationalist, you know, from the next generation, if you will. You be counted as second generation going into the third generation, and you're teaching fourth, fifth generations Muslims and obviously non-Muslims as well. We're not just here to talk about our own community. We're here to talk about education in general in East London. See, as somebody who's an educationalist, in terms of policymakers and those who make decisions that impact, for example, yourself, you've worked at an academy. Whereas there's also those in the state system who say, well, actually, they get too much leeway. This is not the way we should be doing education. You're clearly achieving the results. I mean, how did you do today? Obviously, a big day for your students.
Well, huge day for us and everyone up and down the country, especially, as you said, there were no exams for the last 2 years with centre assessed grade and teacher assessed grades. Our students did remarkably well they got 78% A star to A's and 97% A star to B's. So that's our strongest set of results that we've had. And seeing the joy on our young people's faces celebrate their success was fantastic. In terms of going back to your question about academies, I think that's a question about structure. And at some point, it can be quite reductive to talk about structure, because we know from evidence that the greatest impact on outcomes and attainment for young people is the quality of teaching that goes on in the classroom.
Absolutely, 100%.
And whether you have a local authority school maintained or whether you have academies run by multi-academy trusts, if you don't have high-quality people teaching your kids or young people, then it doesn't matter what the structure is.
No.
So what really needs to happen is that there really needs to be a drive and a push, and this is constantly being on the agenda, had conversations, and lots of people have had conversations with ministers about this. How do we get really strong graduates to come into teaching and want to forge a career?
Absolutely. You're very fair point. I mean, I know teaching is almost seen as the fourth or fifth choice, if you will. Whereas actually, when you look at it in terms of what you can achieve as a teacher, it surely compares to lawyers and doctors and nurses and whatever else. And you've proven that you were a lawyer.
I was, yeah. I was a banking and finance lawyer for a number of years. I worked in the city, but then decided to give that up and retrain as a teacher. But with the aspiration of leading schools, I grew up in East London. I went to a state comprehensive, and it's only when you start moving into the city world, the professional life, when you start mingling with people who've gone to private schools, who've gone to grammar schools, and you get to see the quality of education. And there, I think there's a misunderstanding there when you talk about education.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's a narrow definition of what your grades are like and whether you go to a Russell Group university.
100%.
And that's important.
Yeah.
But the broader sense of having an education, the enriching part of education about understanding philosophy, art, music, and being able to be comfortable in those conversations is sometimes missed. And state comprehensive, unfortunately, don't provide the same level of academic rigor that you would expect if you decided or you were able to afford to send your child to one of the highest performing independent schools. So how do you bridge that gap? And you bridge that gap by having really strong teachers in your class. But the way to do that is, first of all, you need to raise the status of teaching. I don't think in other countries teaching is seen as a Hollywood profession.
Hey, listen, I'll tell you. I mean, my father will tell me stories about how they looked up to their teachers as almost demigods in a small g. But because if the master said you had to do this, and he was respected, or she was respected in the sense that she went out into the village or the town, people would look up and say, so and so is here, the master. It's not like that here, is it?
It's not, unfortunately, and it needs to be. But I think also there has been a seismic shift over the last maybe 5 or 10 years. You've seen education go through what's referred to as the progressive period, where it's predominantly child-centered, and the teacher is the facilitator within the classroom, and almost elevating the child to the same level as a teacher. But what you're seeing in these really high-performing schools that are serving disadvantaged families and backgrounds is that they are turning this on their head, and they're going back to a more traditional type of education, where you don't have the tyranny of adult control, where the adult is seen as the authority figure within the classroom. Their knowledge is valued and respected, and therefore they are the ones who are going to be able to impart knowledge on those students. And once they reach a sufficient level of expertise, then by all means you can begin to start having a classroom that's more open, dialogue, Socratic. But until you get that level of knowledge, that's not going to work. And you've seen that. And ideology, unfortunately, drives a lot of policy and a lot of decisions in education rather than actually evidence-based, because it doesn't fit with people's view about how schools should be, and therefore they don't run it that way.
Well, I think the point about ideology is very important. I mean, our viewers, a lot of them will have, observed how education keeps changing, policies keep changing. Going back 20, 30 years, I mean, there was no such thing as an academy. You were always under the state control, etc. And then when academies came in, brought in by a Labour government, the incoming Cameron government then actually really accelerated that. Now, we can have a debate on academies. But I think what I really want, and I think viewers would really want to know, is what is the actual secret? I mean, you've touched upon it in terms of getting brilliant teachers, but in terms of yourself, turning a whole area, vast number of students whose lives have been completely transformed. I mean, we've read about how they've achieved amazing things from your school and from your college. How can that be replicated? I mean, are you really just an outlier? I mean, something which is a once in a generation phenomenon, or can it be replicated?
Well, I think the type of school that NCS is unique in that sense that it takes able students and provides a certain type of program and provision, which is aimed at propelling them towards the best universities. So having like-minded people in an academically rigorous environment does support that particular type of education provision. Where you have a greater spread of abilities, that becomes a lot more challenging to do. But again, not impossible, because I go back to what I said at the start of our conversations. Sometimes people are looking for a silver bullet, or they're looking for policies which are so dynamic and so innovative